Hi, and welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast, Behind the Sessions. I'm your host, perinatal psychologist, Dr. Kat. On this episode, I really want to get into those first couple of weeks postpartum. And there's really so much to get into during those first few weeks and first few months, even of the transition into having a baby at home. Everyone is figuring out how to take care of a baby. A baby's figuring out how to be outside of the womb. There are all kinds of things to take into consideration, like how are we going to sleep and eat, and who's coming over, and who's not coming over. And essentially, how are we going to arrange ourselves in order to take care of this new being? The thing I want to hone in on is some of what happens in the couple relationship. If you're partnered and you're bringing home a baby, the dynamics of the relationship shift and change in ways that people don't necessarily expect, or at least they haven't done any preparation for what might happen to their relationship when they bring baby home. Some of the patterns that I see with people who are just bringing baby home is there can be, a couple of days to a week where kind of everybody's more or less on the same page. Everything's new. People might be checking in with mom, how she's doing. People might be checking in with dad or partner, how they're doing. And it's sort of understood that this is all brand new, that everyone's trying to figure things out. And that's sort of ideal when everybody can be on the same page. Um, there are for sure a lot of problems to solve during that period of time. Um, and, everybody has different ideas on how they want to have their baby sleep or co sleep or feed, whether it's nursing or bottle feeding. And for the most part, like a lot of those details are discussed or talked about. For some people, a plan is put in place, and others don't necessarily have a plan. They're just kind of going to see how things go. And it is a very steep learning curve trying to figure out all of these details, trying to figure out what your flow is going to be. And, that flow doesn't get solidified for some time. So there's quite a long period of time. It can feel really long, anyways. It's, 3 to 6 months sometimes, just figuring out how to do this and get into some kind of a flow. The first 3 months for sure are a really steep adjustment time. And depending on a couple's scenario, one person is staying home with baby, at least in those first few weeks, depending on parental leave and what kind of time they can take off of work. And typically, the other parent is returning to work at some point. Sometimes it's within a couple of days, sometimes they have a little bit longer, a week or a couple of weeks. Needless to say, whether you're staying home with baby or going to work, you're still in a transitional time and still dealing with now a lot more stuff on your plate, trying to figure that out. It has a huge impact on your level of fatigue, and your capacity in some ways to just think and problem solve, feel like yourself. And what I see often is the kind of farther into those first few weeks, months of postpartum you go, the harder things get in regards to sleep. So if you're not sleeping, if your partner's not sleeping, then you're more likely to feel irritated and irritable and not necessarily be able to communicate in the way that you always have. Or if it was difficult already, it can get more difficult. Another layer of communication challenges is that you might, for the first time as a couple, be figuring out your parenting style and realizing that you have a difference in parenting styles or different perspectives on how to do things. It can be anything from how are we washing bottles or pump parts to ideas on sleeping arrangements, and then all the way to ideas on, how to raise our child. There can be additional complexities. If you're in a relationship where there are cultural differences, you might be finding out for the first time how different cultural practices play out in your parenting styles. or even how pressures from in laws or family members have a different impact on your relationship or how you view your parenting. And with a lot of the things I'm talking about and going to talk about, there is some bit of discussion you can have ahead of time, to see like where you guys are have similarities in parenting styles or have different ideas and opinions, where you're always going to have different opinions, where you can come together and compromise, and then areas where you're just totally in line with each other. And ideally, those conversations can happen before baby even comes. But there is nothing like being in it to really see what it feels like, how you feel, and how these dynamics play out together. So, people are in a situation where they're bringing a baby home, they're going through arguably one of the bigger changes in their lives, and now also dealing with relationship dynamics, family dynamics, learning things about each other as a couple that they may not have known before. And this is, I'm not talking about anything that's, off the wall. This is normal stuff, but it is very complex. And we don't always know all of the complexities that are being played out in any given situation, in any relationships, but especially when it comes to something new where each person, let's say in a couple, are feeling some vulnerability, don't know all of the answers, and are having to figure out things on the fly. And then you add in things like sleep deprivation, financial stressors, work stress, or stress of having to figure out things all on your own. If you're the primary parent who's staying home, having to figure things out all on your own with nobody else around to help. And before you know it, what might have started out as you as a couple being together for that first couple of days or first week where everybody's on the same page, to then more and more starting to live different lives within the same house. Meaning, one person is staying home with baby, figuring out details, figuring out how to soothe the baby, how to feed the baby, how to get them to sleep, and all of the daily tasks of that. Plus, finding out how to nourish themselves by having lunch or breakfast, maybe taking a shower, maybe talking to friends on the phone. So you have one person at home doing all of those tasks, and then the other person going off to work or school or whatever it is that they may be doing, and essentially having a very different day. Neither one of them know what the other is doing all day long. It would be impossible to fill somebody in on all of the details. But even if work is stressful, one parent is leaving to go to work and it's, let's say a stressful job, they still have the capacity to stop and eat lunch, um, not care for somebody else, just take care of themselves, unless, of course, they're in a helping profession. But the intensity of having to care for somebody that's yours, that's in your charge, that's in your care forever, is different than being in a helping profession where you help those people at work and then you go home. Yes, you're invested. Yes, you care about them, but it's very different to have your own little human that you're caring for. There's a lot of pressure that goes along with that. Just keeping a baby fed and supported and sleeping and washing clothes and all of those things. So anyhow, what can start to happen if a couple is not having a lot of communication? Both of them are tired and sleep deprived and just kind of getting through the day in those first few rough months, is assumptions can start being made about each other. Well, for instance, maybe the parent who's going to work sees that the parent who's at home is capable and able to do all of these tasks and all of these things, and starts making more and more assumptions like, oh, they've got it. They don't seem to need much help, or they're not asking for help, so I guess everything's okay. And I'm giving random examples, but these are real examples of things that I hear. If you're in a scenario like this, you could have hundreds of other examples to this point. But then, so if you're the parent who is at home and your partner leaves, you could be making assumptions about them all day, like, oh, they're not calling to check in. That means they don't care. They're not thinking about me anymore. They're not asking about me anymore. Or they're just leaving me to do everything, and now I have to do everything by myself. While those examples could be true, it's very possible that the assumptions that, in those scenarios are based in some kind of a truth. What for sure happens if there's no communication about it is that the assumptions start to grow and build and turn into resentment. It turns into this silent internal battle with your partner that they may know nothing about. And this can be on either side. But when those kind of assumptions start being made and resentment start building, it continues the rift that has potentially already started, and people become more and more disconnected. And this is a really critical period of time to try and maintain connection. And while it is hard to do so, having some form of agreed upon way to touch base and communicate can really help prevent that path to resentment and that path to having a rift between each other. Because, one of the reasons it's so important, among the others I've already listed, is that once you're started down that path of disconnection and resentment and making assumptions, you have a lot of intense feelings. You can have feelings of sadness and anger and grief. And it's possible that because there's no communication happening, that the assumptions, resentment, and feelings that you're having are things that could be resolved or could have been dealt with, or you could have come to an understanding about with each other. But when there is no communication and that kind of inertia of just this is what's happening now, and it feels like too overwhelming to bring it up and talk about it, that can get really hard to overcome. So I like to suggest that people have a path for communication, something that's agreed upon, even if it's just 5 minutes a day at the end of the day to check in with each other. How was your day? How are you doing? Is there anything you need? Is there anything that could make tomorrow a little bit easier? This is examples of questions, and whatever you agree on as a couple that you'd like to ask each other is perfectly fine. And if daily check-ins are not possible, weekly check-ins for maybe a little bit longer, like a half an hour once a week, to just set aside time in your schedule that is dedicated to staying connected is really, really important, especially during this time where brains are foggy and things are difficult and messy. And during that half an hour check in, it could be a longer list, like what's been working this week? What can we change for next week? What kind of support do you need? What kind of sleep are you getting? Are you getting enough sleep? How can we arrange it so that each of us are getting the sleep and support that we need? Who can we ask for help? And these types of questions are really important because it's not about, you're not like working on the relationship. This is not like in depth, some kind of therapy or something where you have to hash out a lot of relationship stuff. We're just talking about like what's going well, what can we tweak for next week? Just really functional conversations. And part of what that does is when there's something scheduled, then you have a time set aside where you know that you can check in about things so that you're not holding on to stuff and letting it stew and fester. And it's agreed upon, so you each know that you're coming together to have this discussion about how to make this work a little bit better for both of you. Now, of course, there are times where there are more significant challenges and things that could really benefit from therapy, and that do need the support of that holding space, of being able to work through deeper relationship issues that may come up. But I'm just talking about a functional practice of how do we stay connected? How do we check in with each other? Because it's very easy to start to drift and again go back into those assumptions. One dynamic that I feel like is very important to highlight is that when you're a couple, let's say it's just the two of you, and you have a need, you're tired or you're hungry, or you want to take a shower, you want to go for a run or go to the gym, you just do that. You just say, hey, I'm going to go do these things. But when you've had a baby and now there's a third person to care for, and ideally it's a team effort caring for this human, you have to negotiate a lot more. Let's say if grocery shopping needs to happen and the primary caregiver wants to just go grocery shopping and not also care for an infant while doing so. That has to be a conversation, with your partner. Can you watch the baby or can you take over while I go do this task? And that is a new process in the relationship where you have to negotiate things where you didn't used to have to, you just did it. So that can bring in a kind of a stress that's new to the relationship where you're asking for things. And if you're somebody who has a hard time asking for things, it becomes even harder because there are times when you need help. And if you're not used to asking for help and support from anybody, it could be your partner, it could be a family member or a friend, that is another stressor that you have to kind of push past while you're not feeling, your best. Another really important dynamic that I think is critical to understand is that in a partnership, especially when there are children involved, you may have days where you both have needs, and the needs that each of you have might be in conflict with one another. So, one example of this could be, let's say, a primary caregiver who's been home with the baby all day really just needs to not be touched, needs a timeout when their partner comes home, just needs a break. And let's say the partner who's been out all day is coming home and has missed baby and the stay at home parent and really wants time together. So, this is kind of a mild example of two people having needs that are in conflict. They're both needs, they're both important. But what can happen when there's not communication is that there can be all kinds of misunderstandings that happen where people might feel hurt, and you might get easily hurt by not feeling heard or seen, that, hey, I just need a minute to myself, or hey, I just really missed you. And that is going to happen. Those types of scenarios where needs are in conflict are going to happen. But all the more reason to have communication strategies in place. So if that comes up, there's a space to discuss it if needed. But more importantly, going into this, transitional time, knowing ahead of time and that you guys might have needs that are in conflict, and just kind of having a discussion about that, putting it out on the table, and agreeing to give each other bandwidth, to give each other space to, yeah, like sometimes I'm going to be irritable and what I say to you is going to come out all crooked. And it's not necessarily going to be the way that I want to, but I might not always have the same level of patience. I might not always have the same level of capacity to really think through a response that I want to give you, or to be able to meet your emotional needs in ways that I used to be able to. There just, in my opinion, has to be space for this during this period of time. Ideally, there's space for it all the time because people are people and we are humaning all the time. We have times where we're just not, our normal selves, or we're drained and exhausted and aren't necessarily showing up with our full capacity all the time. So it's ideal, in my opinion, if couples can have a discussion about as many things as possible before baby comes, so that there can be some kind of common understanding about going into this new phase of life. If possible, agreeing to have flexibility and space for each other to mess up and figure things out, and deciding ahead of time on what your communication plan is. What kinds of time would you like to set aside to just check in with each other and stay connected through the process? It doesn't have to be groundbreaking. It doesn't have to, follow a specific script or protocol or anything like that. It can just be what works for the two of you. So I hope thinking about this has been supportive. And again, apply whatever works for you to your life and your situation, your scenario. Whatever doesn't fit, then it doesn't fit. None of this is prescriptive. None of this is therapy. These are just strategies and tools on how to reduce some of the stress and strain that is normal and common during this period of time. To take some of the high expectations or high pressures off of yourself, off of your relationship, and allow space for learning and exploring and trial and error, because that's what this is about. This is about figuring out how you're going to be a family together, and doing so going in with the best intentions for each other. And before I wrap up for today, I have a really big announcement. On Monday, May 6th, Alanis Morissette is joining me and Wendy Davis of Postpartum Support International on a very awesome and important episode of the Mom and Mind podcast. Alanis is coming on to share her story in ways that she hasn't done before in public. What she shares with us, the insight that she offers, and the compassion that she brings to not only her understanding of herself, but to all people who are dealing with perinatal mental health is really astounding. We're just so honored and grateful that she spent so much time with us. I, as the board chair of PSI, and Wendy, as the CEO and president of PSI, we're really, really honored to share the airwaves and space and time with her. So please do tune in on Monday, May 6th for a very special episode with Alanis Morissette. Be sure to find the Mom and Mind podcast on your favorite listening platform and follow or subscribe so that you can get each and every episode downloaded directly to you. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time.